Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day. Greetings to those on the internet or those that might be watching live. Today's message is entitled The Sinful Nature. And what kind of inspired this is I went to a Bible study a few weeks ago, and we were listening to a teacher going through the scriptures, and something caught my attention. He said, mankind does not have a sinful nature. And it kind of caught my attention. And there was a house full of people listening to the teacher. And he said, we need to stop teaching that mankind has a fallen nature. And so they continued to go through the study, and I'm thinking in the scriptures, like flipping for the next 15-20 minutes. I'm flipping through the scriptures, trying to come up with a conclusion as to whether we have a fallen nature or we don't. So I wanted to present that today, but at the end of the study, I said, I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with this guy. And somebody looked at me and said, don't worry, you don't get it all at one time. I said, no, based off of what I see in the scriptures, I have to disagree. And but anyway, that's what I want to present today, and I want to start off in Romans chapter 5. And if anybody, disagrees, I would love to hear, another side to it. But I didn't really get enough scriptural evidence out of the study to conclude that we don't. And one thing that was brought in for reasoning was we have a conscience. And I don't think the conscience and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit are the same thing, but somebody tried to make that connection, which I didn't agree with that. I'm going to start off in Romans chapter 5 and verse 6. For when we were yet without strength, in due time Messiah died for the wicked. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But Elohim commended his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Messiah died for us. I'll skip down to verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. I'll dig into that a little more in a minute, but it says Adam was a figure of him that was to come. He was a shadow. But let me skip down to verse 12 through 14. Verse 18. Therefore, as by the offense of one, judgment came upon all men to condemnation, even so by the righteousness of one, the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous. So it's almost like, what Adam did, the Messiah is reversing. Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did much more abound, that as sin hath reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Yeshua Messiah our Master. Now I want to go back to Genesis chapter 1. and verse 26, Genesis 1 and 26. And Elohim said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So Elohim created man in his own image. In the image of Elohim created he him, male and female created he them. And Elohim blessed them. And Elohim said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Chapter 2 of Genesis, in verse 18, and Yahweh Elohim said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. And out of the ground Yahweh Elohim formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field, but for Adam there was not found a help. The reason I put that in there is it says that Adam was a figure of him who was to come, of course talking about Messiah. And in another place, which we'll read in a minute, says that Messiah is the last Adam. But here it says that he named everything, and that kind of caught my attention, and I want to read. I'm going to hold my finger here, but I'm going to read another verse in Ephesians chapter 3, and then I'm coming right back to Genesis. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 15. Well, I'm going to back it up to 14. For this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named. Thought that was kind of an interesting connection there. Back to Genesis and chapter 5. Genesis chapter 5 and verse 1. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that Elohim created man, in the likeness of Elohim made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. So we see that the first man and woman was created after the image of Elohim, but here we see in verse 3 that Adam had a son in his likeness, after his image. And as we'll see in a minute, that we have taken on the image of Adam's fallen nature. In Romans chapter 6, starting in verse 1 of Romans chapter 6. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Know you not that so many of us as were baptized into Yeshua Messiah were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Messiah was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we have been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man is impaled with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. So here, this is a perfect illustration of what nature needs to die. It's the old man, it's the fallen nature, and that needs to be buried with the Messiah so that we can be raised up in newness of life. And Corinthians chapter 5 talks about a new creation. If any man be in Messiah, he is a new creature. The old things have passed away. Behold, all has become new. That old things is that old nature. And we're born into that, and that's the purpose of this message. Verse 7, for he that is dead is freed from sin. What does that mean? If the old man is truly dead, you're freed from sin, because it's the old man that wants to live in sin, that has a rebellious nature. And we're going to see here in a minute that the flesh has a mind and cravings of its own. Let's skip down to, for the sake of time, chapter 7 and verse 5. Chapter 7 and verse 5, it says, for when we were in the flesh. Now, I want to hold that thought. When we were in the flesh. Now, let's look at chapter 8 and verse 8. It says, so then they that are in the flesh cannot please Elohim. All right? They that are in the flesh cannot please Elohim. Now, let's go back to chapter 7 and verse 5. When we were in the flesh, past tense, the motion of sins which were by the law did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit, not in oldness of the letter. When that old man is still alive and we're actually walking in it, walking in that flesh, there is a bondage that we carry around every day, and it has to die. That's how we walk in newness of life. When the Messiah penetrates our hearts, when that Spirit comes in and quickens the conscience, that gives us the ability to put the old man to death. We start following the Spirit instead of the flesh. And in verse 6 here, when it says, so that we can serve a newness of spirit, not in the oldness of the letter, the mainstream interpretation of that is now that we walk in the Spirit, we don't have to keep the letter. But what it's actually saying is the Spirit is our drive. And if you obey the Spirit, you won't transgress the letter. Let me skip down to verse 14 here. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I want to do, I know these next few verses here are kind of hard to follow, but I'm going to kind of paraphrase as we go along for clarity. I'm going to start over again in verse 15. For that which I do, I don't allow others to do. For what I want to do, this is what I don't do. But the things that I hate, this is what I do. If then I do that which I don't want to do, I consent unto the law that it is good. What he's referring to here is rebellious nature inside of him. If he does things that he really doesn't want to do, it's proof that the law is good. Now then, it is no more I that do it, but it is the sin that is dwelling inside of me. I don't see how anybody could read that verse and not come to the conclusion that we have a sinful nature. It says, it's not me that's doing it, it is the sin that is dwelling inside of me. Wow. Well, where's it dwelling? Right here. We carry it around. And the reason I was kind of shocked to hear this teacher say that is because, I lived a very rebellious life in my youth, and I still battle that every day. I battle it. I have to fight it. And I know that it's in me, and that it is only through His grace and trying to submit to Him every single day that I can keep that old man in check. And I know I was born with it, and I had to learn. I had to learn a different way. And I wasn't born with knowing right. I'm sorry. I had to be taught what was right the hard way. So in verse 17, he says, if I'm still practicing this, it's not me. It's the sin that's dwelling inside of me. For I know that is in me, that is in my flesh, dwells no good thing. There's nothing good in my flesh. For to will is present with me. That means the desire is present. But how to perform that which is good, I find not. There's a desire to do the right thing, but I can't figure out how to do it. And again, he's going back to the context in verse 5 is when we were in the flesh. For the good that I want, I do not. But the evil which I don't want, this is what I do. Now, if I do that which I don't want to do, it is no more I that do it, but the sin that dwells in me. I find then a law that when I want to do good, evil is present with me. Wow. That kind of reminds me of back there in Genesis when he was talking to Cain about sin. He says, when let me read that real quick. Interesting. Genesis chapter 2. And it actually personifies sin as he. No, I'm sorry. That's in chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4, verse 6, and Yahweh said unto Cain, why are you wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If you do well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. Sin is right there present. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Sin has a desire for you, but you need to rule over him, and he's waiting right there at the door. Paul said that I find in a law that when I want to do good, evil is still present. Why? Because we're still right here in the flesh. And that's how the enemy wants to creep into our lives, is through the flesh, through the five senses of the flesh. Lust of the eyes, things that we hear, we want to taste, we want to touch, we want to feel. And we've got to keep that into subjection. Now, how do we do that? How do we keep the flesh in subjection? Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of Elohim, that you present your bodies, your flesh, as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto Elohim, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of Elohim. We have to be renewed in the mind. Now, we've been talking about this fallen nature. And there's a few more verses I want to get into about the difference between the Adam nature and the second or last Adam nature. But let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And verse 42, 1 Corinthians 15:42, so also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. And so it was written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. So this is the only place I know of where it actually calls him the last Adam. Howbeit, that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterward that which is spiritual. The first man is of the earth, earthy. The second man is the master from heaven. As is the earthy, such are they also that are earthy. And as is the heavenly, such are they also that are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the earthy, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. That's it right there. We have the image of the first Adam, but we look forward to taking on the image of the heavenly, the last Adam. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of Yahweh, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. Meaning there will be some alive when the Messiah returns that didn't die, and they will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. That's the next verse. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. This goes in with 1 Corinthians chapter 4, where it talks about at the last trump, the dead in Messiah shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up with them to meet him in the clouds, and we shall ever be with him. Now, concerning this image of the heavenly, says we had the image of the earthly, and we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. Let's look at Romans chapter 8 and verse 29. Romans 8:29. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Those that he knew beforehand, he predestinated them to be conformed to the image of his Son. What is that image? That's his image, because any man that has seen me has seen the Father. The Son is the image of the Father, and we have been predestinated to be conformed in the image of the Son. Paul in Galatians chapter 1 talks about the Son being revealed in me, and that he was chosen from his mother's womb. That's Galatians chapter 1 verse 15. But when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me. That's what we look forward to. That's what we're trying to accomplish, is the image of the Son being manifested in us through renewal of the mind and putting the old nature, the old man, to death. And we have to do that daily until we actually put off this flesh. 2 Peter chapter 1 talks about a new nature. 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 2. Grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of Yahweh and of Yeshua our Master, according as his majestic power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and holiness, through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these you might be partakers of the majestic or divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. Through exceeding great and precious promises, that by these we might be partakers of the divine nature, which seems to include the image of his Son. Let's flip back to Romans chapter 7 and 8. Close out here in just a minute. Just a few minutes. We left off in chapter 7, and 21 again says that, when I want to do good, evil is still present. For I delight in the law of Yahweh after the inward man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. His members there, he's referring to his body. There is a law of sin working in his body. Verse 24, O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death? Paul's meditating on what he just wrote there, and he's like, who will deliver me from this flesh, from this body that I'm in? And then he answers the question. I thank Elohim through Yeshua, Messiah, our Master. So then with my mind, I myself serve the law of Elohim, but with the flesh, the law of sin. It is through the mind that we conquer the flesh. Chapter 8, verse 1, there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Messiah Yeshua, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua hath made me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. What does that mean? In Galatians it says that the law could not bring salvation. It only pointed out sin. It could not, it only identified what sin was. It couldn't save. And also the rebellious nature in the flesh wants to break his commandments. And that's actually seen repeatedly in chapter 7. It says the passion of sin which was by the law. That's in verse 5. The passion of sin which was by the law, meaning there's a law put in place. The rebellious nature says, I want to do it anyway. We see that back in the garden. He said, don't eat from the tree. The thought came, you can eat from the tree anyway. It's not going to kill you. It looks good for food. It's going to make you wise. It's good fruit. So the rebellious nature says, I want to eat it anyway. And we inherited that. And that's also seen in verse 8, sin taking occasion by the commandment. And also in verse 11, he repeats it again, for sin taking occasion by the commandment. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, towards the end, it says, the strength of sin is the law. The strength of sin is the law. All right, back in verse 3, for what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, Yahweh sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin condemned sin in the flesh. Why? That the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us. That's a mouthful right there. The reason he did this, in verse 4, is that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us. How do we do that? Who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind, fleshly mind, is enmity against Elohim, for it is not subject to the law of Elohim, neither indeed can be. So then they that are in the flesh cannot please Elohim. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of Elohim dwelleth in you. Now if any man have not the Spirit of Messiah, he is none of his. But if Messiah be in you, the body is dead, old man, because of sin, but the Spirit spirit is life because of righteousness. But if the spirit of him that raised up Yeshua from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Messiah from the dead shall also quicken or bring to life your mortal bodies by his spirit that dwelleth in you. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors not to the flesh to live after the flesh. For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you, through the Spirit, do mortify the deeds of the body, that means mortify means put to death the deeds of the body, the actions. Through the Spirit, you have to put to death the actions of the flesh, the actions of the body. Then you shall live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of Elohim, they are the sons of Elohim. Now I just want to read a couple verses that kind of tie in with this whole message here. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? Galatians chapter 5 gives us a very good illustration between the actions and the deeds and the nature of the flesh and of the Spirit. Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 16. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. Whose lusts? The flesh. You have to walk in the Spirit to keep your flesh from getting what it wants. It has a desire. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you want. That's amazing. But if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. Why? Because the Spirit won't lead you to break the law. Now, the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these. That word works is the employment of, the deeds of, the actions of. The employment of your flesh, the actions of your flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do these things shall not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And they that are Messiahs, they that belong to the Messiah, have impaled or crucified the flesh, the old man, with the affections and lusts. So when we're truly in this walk with the Messiah through the power of his Spirit and the awakening of the conscience, we have put to death the old man, the flesh, with its with the flesh's affections and lusts. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Romans chapter 13 and verse 14, just a couple more verses here. Romans 13 and verse 14 says, but put you on the Master Yeshua Messiah, and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. The flesh has its own lusts. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. And you hath he quickened, or brought to life, who were dead in trespasses and sins, wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. There's a spirit that is working in the children of disobedience, among whom also we all had our conversation in time past in the lusts of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature, it was by nature, the children of wrath, even as others. That's pretty deep right there. It says that we used to be just like that, and that we were by nature the children of wrath. And I'm going to close out with John chapter 6. And verse 63. 6:63. It is the spirit that quickens, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. Hallelujah.